Dino, everyone always talks about the deficit being an issue, but what issues do you see with our deficit?
The demise of this country as a world power, as an empire.
Okay.
I mean, this is going to be a long explanation. So now this comes from something that I read and I watched about from Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is like the best hedge fund manager in the world, the Bridgewater Associates. They're the largest, most profitable, most successful hedge fund out there. And Dalio is like a student of history. He looks at he likes to talk about mistakes, so it's history. You learn, those who fail to study history are doomed to repeat it,
right?
Basically. So here's the thing, why? The deficit, is think of it as a company or a household, right? You keep borrowing money. And imagine where everyone wants to lend you money, so you just keep borrowing it, but you're not making enough money. So imagine you don't make enough money, but you spend more than you make. And right now, everything seems to be okay because the whole world, investors, whatever, seems to be more than happy to lend you money, right? But if that stops, if that changes, there goes everything. The house of cards will come down. As the US, I wouldn't call it an empire, but you know what I mean, right? We're top of the food chain right now. We're the most wealthiest country, highest GDP, highest per capita income, #1 in trade. The world uses our currency as a reserve currency. We're top dog. But, if this thing keeps going like this, there's a true risk of the house of cards coming down, and it's our demise. Ray Dalio has this book that talks about the principles of dealing with the changing world order. So I'm going to explain it like from a world order. Like, what's the world order? We're #1, right? Our #1 adversary is China. They're coming up really close. So if you look at history, every country, every empire goes through like a cycle. The rise of the great power, the top, and then the decline, and then up comes another power, takes over, then a decline. Dalio did an amazing job looking at history, right? And he said that, and he explained that every country that gets to the top does several different things really well. Education, advancement, technology, innovation, right? Leader in global trade, extremely competitive, very strong economic output, right? Very strong military, right? The world uses it as a reserve currency, right? That country's currency is the world's reserve currency, and it's the center of finance, capital markets. Everybody wants to invest with our capital markets, right? So ring a bell, it's what we are today. Right? And the way these cycles work for those 8 things that Dalio put together, that Dalio explained, are consistent among history. Like, he goes back to explain like how the Dutch were the world power, the Dutch Empire. And then they went up, topped, declined, and then guess who took over from them? The British took over from them and stayed there for a long period of time until World War II. And then Bretton Woods, where the whole new world order was established, was the opportunity for the US to become top now. But now it's looking like we're in a decline, and it's not just the deficit, it's a big picture. It's not just the rampant spending more money than you make, right? So what Dalio explained is that what happens in the country when it grows like that, when it starts being very advanced, when it starts going, there's a lot of prosperity, there's a lot of peace, the country gets very, very wealthy, right? And it builds its military to protect its assets all over the world, to protect its position, right? So there's a lot of spending, for example. As it keeps going and going and going, eventually there's a structural change within the country, within its people. One example is if you look at the work ethic and the mindset of people in the 50s after World War II and the 60s. It's very different from today. We're, for the lack of a better word, like this current generation is a very entitled generation compared to the 50s where they were just a very different mindset, right? So all these things happen and the country gets to a point where, it's no longer, it loses its competitiveness because cost of production of things gets really high. So other countries, its competitors in the world can make things cheaper. Ring a bell, right? All these things are happening or have happened, right? And what happens is the country no longer makes enough money, right? So it keeps borrowing. But it's okay to borrow because one of the 8 factors, like it's a center of capital markets, it's the reserve currency, everyone will be happy to lend it. It keeps borrowing like that. And it creates asset bubbles, great financial crisis and all that kind of stuff. You see all these asset bubbles, and when the bubbles pop, what happens, right? The country has to increase its deficit, has to print more money to bail it out. And then it creates another asset bubble, and then it prints more money. Eventually it gets to a point where it can no longer do it. And also one really interesting thing that I thought is, in this whole process, which is proven in history, it happens every time in all these empires, right? Going all the way back to the Chinese Empire, the Chinese dynasties, right? Is when countries print a lot of money, they print money because they make less money than they spend. But while they're at the top, it's easy to keep printing money because everybody wants to lend you money, right? But what happens whenever it prints money is it creates asset bubbles, right? And it creates a wealth gap because people with money, the haves, have better access to the money, right? And it takes what? It takes what to make money? It takes money to make money. And then they get wealthier, and when this cycle happens, they get wealthier, the wealth gap widens, and what happens is there's internal strife, there's division, there's internal conflict. The haves always want to protect what they have and want to keep staying in their position. And the have-nots always going to go, hey, ring a bell, right? And when this internal conflict coupled with the spendthrift and deficits out of control, slowly erodes the country's currency as a reserve currency out there. And when that erodes, that means the confidence of the world to lend you money erodes. Then look at our reserve currency. I think, not too many years ago, we were north of 70% of the world's reserve currency. We're now like high 50s now, right? So over time, what Dalio showed is that the decline part of the cycle happens very gradually and then suddenly. Where are we right now? We're probably in the decline level of all the things I just mentioned that he has, not me, he demonstrated it from fact, from history. We have big divisiveness in our politics, a lot of internal conflict. Technically, we all can't get along, right? Our military spending is going rampant, and it's still not enough to counter our biggest enemy, who is that country that's coming to take us over, which is China, right? Our deficit's going crazy. We're not making enough money consistently. We're just borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. But right now it's okay because we're the reserve currency. Our capital markets is still number one, and everybody wants to lend us money. But eventually there's a tipping point where it can't go on anymore, and poof,